Our story begins with Guyama slamming our protagonist, Kirishima, against a wall with all his might, demanding that he apologize. Guyama says he is looking down on him, so Kirishima should apologize for everything. Our protagonist, Kirishima, belongs to the Explorer class, and while Guyama is also in the Explorer class, his specific abilities increase his attack power to an extraordinary level. Guyama's two henchmen claim he is the strongest explorer because his skill is extremely rare, and they immediately ask if Kirishima has an ability of his own. He had never entered a dungeon before, meaning he was a virgin in that regard. It was often said that his abilities were terrible. Kirishima apologizes and kneels, while everyone comments on how pathetic it is that the guy is already bowing down. Guyama says he will forgive Kirishima, but he has something to do first, so he kicks Kirishima in the face, telling him he should be grateful for everything he's done. Suddenly, a girl enters the room and offers her hand to Kirishima, asking if he is okay. The protagonist stands up, says he is fine, and runs away while apologizing, leaving the girl looking sad. Everyone laughed at Kirishima, and it was exactly as they said. Kirishima doesn't have a proper ability. He's just a useless guy. Out of nowhere, dungeons appeared in that world, and inside them are monsters, magic, and treasures. Monsters do not leave the dungeon, but when humans enter, they are granted abilities skills that can go up or down in rank, and Guyama's ability to increase attack power was a major victory. Regardless, Kirishima's ability is a rule breaker, yet it seemed like a collection of bad skills, as if he had none at all. Furthermore, having lesser abilities isn't the same as having none. Thanks to those skills, he could earn a little money, and Kirishima wonders if he might be useful later. After finishing his thought, he hears a noise inside the dungeon and looks back, hiding behind a rock and wondering what is happening. An emergency screen appears on his display, and as he looks inside the cave, a group of friends begins to emerge, wondering how a monster like that could have appeared. Kirishima recognizes the group. They were high-ranking and very famous explorers using teleportation, and Kirishima wonders how strong a monster must be for them to want to escape at that moment. Kirishima tells himself he has to run, but he ends up bumping into a girl's chest. He apologizes, and when he looks to see who it was, he immediately falls in love. Her name was Miru, and quickly a small robot appears, stating that Kirishima should face the death penalty for that, and that it saw everything perfectly. Miru thanks him for the support. She was someone who was constantly live streaming. The real Miru was right in front of Kirishima, which felt overwhelming. He was nervous and wondered what he should do. He apologizes and asks if she is truly Miru. The robot gets irritated, asking if Kirishima is blind or perhaps eager to see. It was indeed Miru, the high-ranking sword saint and explorer, and also a streamer with over 100,000 followers. All of Japan knows her, the woman who is always kind, incredible in battle, and so cute that people could talk about her for 3 days and nights straight. Miru apologizes to Kirishima, saying she is currently live, and soon, 10,000 people appear in the stream. She thanks everyone for tuning in. Kirishima is startled, and the girl says this was supposed to be an emergency monster extermination inside that dungeon, so today she was in luck. Kirishima agrees, since she had to fight emergency monsters. As she was live with many viewers, Kirishima starts to think. A whole high-ranking group just entered and left without defeating the monster, and she plans to fight it alone. Kirishima asks her to wait, saying she should at least form a party first. Miru asks why, and Kirishima explains that he saw the high-ranking group simply leaving. The girl goes quiet, and Kirishima asks if he said something wrong. Miru says there is no way that high-ranking group would start losing, and Kirishima admits that's true. The robot then says that if you look closely, you realize the boy is actually Kirishima from school. Kirishima realizes that the one speaking through the robot is Guyama. That guy has social anxiety and is a very introverted person, without skills and just a useless individual. Kirishima starts remembering everyone talking about him, until the robot tells Miru she shouldn't get close to that guy, that he was probably trying to get her attention, and that he should leave because he's trash. He adds that his face and name are recognized, and that he is a strange person. Kirishima lowered his head, almost breaking down in tears, but Miru asked everyone to calm down and said she was sure that guy had stopped her with good intentions, so nobody should get angry about it. She approached Kirishima, apologizing and saying that now everyone's expectations about this had become incredibly high, so she would see Kirishima later. With that, she entered the dungeon, and silence hung heavily over the area. Irritated, Kirishima said that Maybe this should be enough already. He turned his face away and said he should just go home, that at least now he would finally be useful in some kind of way. But suddenly Kirishima could not take a single step forward, as memories of his past surfaced in his mind, back to the moment when his father held him by the arms, and Kirishima asked if he could become a strong adult, just like him someday. Kirishima's father told him that of course he could. He was incredibly proud of his own son, and obviously he would obtain an extremely powerful ability in the future. Soon after, Kirishima grabbed onto his father and asked why his father was missing one eye. That injury was proof that he had protected someone important, and his mother immediately started laughing. The family was incredibly happy until his father placed Kirishima back on the ground and said that because of that, he needed to make a promise. He had to become an amazing guy at the clinic and protect important people as well. Kirishima made that promise, and then he returned to the present time, apologizing because all he had were useless abilities. But then, an extremely loud sound echoed throughout the cave, and Kirishima wondered what had happened to his abilities. Ignoring that for the moment, he suddenly heard Miru's scream coming from inside the cave, instantly making him panic as he started running to help her. Inside the cave, Miru began saying that this was impossible. It was a dragon. She could not believe the boy had really been telling the truth about that thing, and fear immediately overtook her. The dragon attempted to attack, and because of her combat experience, a new rule-ignoring effect was activated. The moment she was about to be struck, a new ability that ignored the enemy's attack power was triggered. Kirishima activated that ability and immediately counterattacked the dragon. 10,000 people were watching, all shouting that the supposedly useless guy had actually managed to protect Miru, and nobody could believe it. The dragon was violently thrown backward, crashing hard against the wall, and Kirishima had actually destroyed a red dragon. Everyone began asking who that guy was. It was Kirishima from the school, and nobody could believe it. That kid, Kirishima, had defeated a red dragon by ignoring the opponent's attack power and launching it away with overwhelming force. That ability was incredibly powerful, and because of it, he could protect anyone standing close to him. Miru called out to him, but the dragon slowly began standing back up, and Kirishima wondered how the dragon could even rise after taking a hit like that. The only technique he possessed was the ability to ignore the enemy's attack power, and he quickly realized he could not properly handle damage. The dragon started preparing a magical attack, so he immediately ran toward Miru, shouting that a devastating breath attack was coming straight at them. He grabbed her hand and started running. There are two types of attacks when dealing with a dragon inside a dungeon: physical attacks and magical attacks. Ignoring attack power was effective against physical attacks. However, if they were hit directly by a dragon's breath attack, the effects were completely unknown. At that moment, Kirishima suddenly realized the dragon had already attacked, and that he had misunderstood the situation. Kirishima could not escape in time. He tried using ignore attack power, but the force was overwhelming, and both of them were blown backward. The cave slowly began collapsing around them. Kirishima's abilities would not work here. He realized the falling rocks had completely blocked the exit, leaving them trapped with no possible escape route. However, he had no choice now other than defeating that red dragon. Miru called out to Kirishima and apologized, saying she had been stupid. Even though Kirishima had warned her, she did not listen and still entered the cave anyway. She apologized over and over again, but Kirishima told her it was okay. At that moment, he remembered his father and the promise he made to become a good person who protects the people important to him, never becoming someone selfish who only thinks about himself. So he told her everything was fine because he had an idea. He could distract the red dragon, which meant there should be an opening for an attack. And if the dragon only used physical attacks, then he could simply ignore them entirely. Miru said the dragon was incredibly strong, and he admitted she was right. However, this was definitely the exact attack they needed. She had to use her sword and her holy sword abilities to defeat that dragon. At that moment, she wiped away her tears, saying she would do her absolute best, and apologizing to everyone for showing such a pathetic side of herself. So Kirishima only needed to buy some time for her, and then she would unleash an ultimate move capable of defeating that red dragon. The audience said they never expected to witness Miru's full power in such a raw and strategic situation. Just watching this battle alone was already completely worth it. Kirishima asks what brute force strategy meant, and Miru explains that everyone calls the skill by that name. It was a special technique exclusive to those who possess the Holy Sword, a technique that can defeat any high-ranking monster with a single blow. To use it in combat is an advanced technique that requires significant time and concentration to charge. Kirishima understands, saying he will buy as much time as necessary, and Miru says she will leave it to him so that both can get out alive. Miru looks at Kirishima and tells him he has more courage than anyone else. He smiles and begins to advance toward the dragon, taunting it by saying he is much more appetizing. Meanwhile, Miru prepares her attack. At that moment, the dragon tries to attack Kirishima, striking with its front paw and then its hind legs. It was a close call. He was nearly crushed. If the timing of the skill activation were off even slightly, Kirishima would die instantly. But he is able to see the movements. Kirishima remembers the training he had with his father. He hadn't wanted to practice swordsmanship anymore, but his father told him he couldn't give up. He had promised to become an explorer who can protect important people, so he had to ensure his sword training was sufficient. He stands back up. It's time to practice. He couldn't give up now, and would keep his promise to his father. He remembers that with the sword fighting he learned from his father, there was no way he could fight the monsters he had seen many times in videos and other streams. So, he activates his skill to counterattack the dragon, believing it would all be worth it. Eventually, the dragon falls heavily to the ground, and Miru activates her skill. Opening her eyes, she says she is ready and tells Kirishima to move away. He jumps back, and Miru leaps toward the dragon with everything she has, using her ultimate move. Kirishima is left speechless, seeing all that light directed above him, and is stunned. The dragon crashes to the ground and appears to have been defeated. The viewers say it was just as expected of Miru. Soon, Kirishima approaches, asking if she is okay. She says yes, but that she is just a bit tired, which is why she fell to her knees. She credits Kirishima for her success, but then she looks to the side and shouts for him to be careful. By the time he notices, it was too late. The dragon had attacked Kirishima, slamming him hard against the wall. Miru tries to see if Kirishima is okay, but it's too late. The dragon stands back up. Even though the dragon had taken Miru's supreme attack, it managed to rise as if nothing had happened. This was a high-ranking emergency monster. She tries to get up, but the power usage had drained her life force. The dragon prepares to strike Miru with everything it has. Kirishima tries to do something. He throws himself off the wall, telling himself he has to save Miru, and uses his physical power, ignorance. After Miru used her final move, Kirishima shouldn't have any strength left, but he knows if he can just deal a small amount of damage, he can absolutely destroy the dragon. So Kirishima raises his sword against the dragon and counterattacks. Miru tells him it's enough, and asks him to stop, but Kirishima screams, landing several attacks on the dragon until it is thrown against the wall. He begins to breathe deeply, thinking he must have finally defeated the monster. He looks at Miru, saying that now everything should be fine, and that final turn was enough. Kirishima begins to fall to the ground, appearing as if he's about to faint. Miru tries to wake him, but it isn't enough. He was happy that Miru was safe. As he fades out, he wonders why Miru is calling his name. After a while, Kirishima begins to wake up. He was in Miru's lap. He feels embarrassed and stands up quickly, wondering why this was happening to him. Miru says she is happy he is okay. He wonders why Miru would give him a knee pillow, and it wasn't just that. He was certainly supposed to be fighting the red dragon, but he realized he had defeated it. He had managed to turn things around, took a hit, landed an extreme counterattack, and now he asks what happened to the red dragon. The machine appears in front of him, stating that the red dragon was destroyed by Kirishima, and the impact definitely defeated it. Kirishima understands everything, and at that moment, Miru thanks him and asks to show her gratitude, as Kirishima was the person who saved her life. He says thanks aren't necessary and that he didn't do anything important in the end, but Miru insists. Without Kirishima, she would have certainly died, and she wouldn't be satisfied if she couldn't show her appreciation, so she asks him to let her thank him. Kirishima wonders what he should do. Obviously, he was very happy, but if he refused, it would be bad for Miru. He says it's fine if it's her. She is grateful and suggests they exchange information. If there is ever a problem, she should have Kirishima's contact info. He is shocked and asks if she is joking. Getting Miru's contact info was the dream of every man in Japan. He wonders if it's a dream and starts pinching himself. She asks if something is wrong and why he pinched his own cheek out of nowhere. Kirishima says everything is fine. And so, he exchanges contacts with her. But the name was a little different. He wonders if perhaps that was Miru's real name, and she says that is a secret from everyone else in the world. Kirishima feels embarrassed and sees he was right. Then she asks if Kirishima has time tomorrow. He says yes, so it's time for them to eat together, and they set a place to meet. The next day, Kirishima was standing at the meeting spot. In the end, he had said yes because of the flow of the conversation, but he wonders why he said it. He accidentally made a promise, and now he doesn't know what to do. Soon, someone recognizes Kirishima from Miru's livestream. He looks similar, and they wonder if perhaps he is even kinder in person. At that moment, as Kirishima goes to run, he ends up tripping, and the girl approaches him, asking if he is okay. Kirishima says everything was fine, until he looks at the girl, and she asks if he doesn't recognize her, as she was certain they would know each other since they exchanged contacts yesterday. It was Miru from the same place as him. Kirishima is surprised by this, and she introduces herself again. Then, they decide to go out to eat. After sitting down, they end up saying that Kirishima could order anything he wanted from the menu. There was no ramen, which was obvious. The girl orders a chocolate pancake with a tropical topping, also plenty of cream and something else good, along with a blueberry milkshake. She ordered very quickly. Kirishima was nervous. It was the first time in his life he had been in a place like this. If he could just be with a girl, just the two of them, perhaps that would be enough. Soon she asks what Kirishima is going to eat, and he says he will have the same chocolate pancake with a tropical topping. Next, she catches Kirishima's attention, saying there is something she wanted to apologize for. In fact, she knew about him suffering from bullying or something of the sort. Actually, no matter the reason, the fact was that she didn't have the capacity to help Kirishima, and she apologizes sadly. Kirishima says she was right. Miru was super popular, and being known for being involved with bullying would ruin her career, which meant she was doing what was best for herself. Being forced to kneel and apologize in the middle of the school hallway, looking like an idiot in front of everyone, he felt so pathetic on his own. Kirishima apologizes, saying he was such a coward. At that moment, Miru asks what happened in the end to someone like him. She asks if Kirishima was thinking of something negative, and tells him he isn't a coward at all. He doesn't need to apologize for anything. Even if Guyama and the others are to blame for this, Kirishima wasn't a coward, and he should move forward because he is a very brave person. He thanks her, and Miru smiles, saying that is why he should be more confident. After all, Kirishima is someone very kind and handsome. Embarrassed, Kirishima wonders what that compliment was about, and says there's no way he is handsome. Miru says she was just stating some facts, and she truly wanted to talk about it, though still embarrassed. Kirishima opens his eyes, and after a while the food arrives. He gives thanks for the meal. Now, Miru says it was time to eat. When she takes the first bite, it was delicious, and soon she mentions that something was bothering her. When the red dragon appeared and Kirishima protected her without thinking of his own safety, the protagonist simply says he did what felt right at the time, but Miru says that was exactly what she was thinking. Kirishima is not the type of person who should be mocked by everyone. He really is very cool and a very incredible person. In that moment, Kirishima gets embarrassed, and she starts simply staring at him. Then Miru decided what she wanted to do to show her gratitude to Kirishima. She starts smiling while holding his cheeks, while Kirishima thinks she is very close. And at that moment he was starting to get even more embarrassed. At that point, Miru takes him to a hair salon. It was Operation Remake Kirishima's entire look. She didn't reveal her own identity, so she would wait outside. One of her fans was a guy who worked with hair, so it was a bit difficult to handle that situation. Kirishima ends up going inside. He apologizes, but then the woman simply asks him to sit in the chair. He sits down, and after a while she starts doing Kirishima's hair. He decides to take a look, wondering if that look was really him. Right at that moment, outside, Miru was on her phone, saying the number of views was at 100 million. Meanwhile, a little further away, some girls were talking about the broadcast from the previous day, saying that boy was really very cool, the most watched video since she created the channel. From then on, she was decided. She is definitely going to make Kirishima a regular member of the channel. Next, he decides to come out, thanking Miru for the wait, but she gets embarrassed upon seeing Kirishima. It was as if she had fallen in love. He asks what happened when she looked back at him. Kirishima had changed a lot, but she said nothing happened and told him he was right, saying that he could call her by her name, since he was using too many honorifics at that point. Kirishima understands and asks if it was okay to call her by her name, and Miru says yes. Then, in the end, she wanted to take a little more time with Kirishima to talk about something. She asks if he would want to be an owner of the channel along with her, and asks if he thinks that isn't possible for him. That wasn't the problem. Then she decides to show something on her phone to Kirishima, and it was something about her powerful attack. Just looking at it, there were 100 million views on that video. It was a person who had watched since she put the video on the internet last night. It has already passed through people's phones that many times. The cool boy from a school who came to save Miru and also stopped a move from a red dragon. It wouldn't be strange if it simply got even more views. There were also many comments saying it was insane, talking about the red dragon's attacks, something monstrous, and asking if the boy really was very strong. Everyone was hearing his name. She was very excited, talking about the comments praising Kirishima, and he asks her to stop already. The most important thing was this. Everyone wanted him to become a regular on the channel, someone who was always around. Kirishima asks what that was about, and Miru responds that people were very excited to see him appear on the channel more often. Because of that, she really needs Kirishima to accept her request, and she would do anything. Startled, his phone begins to ring. It was his student ID. It seems he left it at the hair salon, so he goes to get it. Kirishima runs off, and Miru wonders if she went too far. Upon arriving at the hair salon, Kirishima ends up getting his student ID, and in the process, she hands him a pomade, saying it was a gift. That was her way of thanking him for saving Miru, after she realized by looking at the student ID that he was indeed the boy who had appeared in Miru's previous broadcast. There are still things she wanted to ask in person. She seemed to be lacking rest, just like yesterday, and maybe she had done some more broadcasts. So Kirishima should give her support and obviously would be able to protect Miru whenever he wanted to do that sort of thing. Kirishima understands what she was saying, and it was something he wanted. The lack of courage to try and carry the red dragon was impossible. Forget that high-ranking Miru, there is still a lot of reason why she desperately wants more views. Kirishima understands, and soon she says that Kirishima was very handsome, and he simply leaves. Miru was walking, counting on her phone the views that had appeared at that moment, the legendary episode of a handsome boy who appears out of nowhere. Maybe she's doing something else or being mysterious about the boy who simply went through a series of transformations. But at that moment, she accidentally bumps into a boy who was in front of her, and they get angry. Meanwhile, Kirishima arrived at the park, saying that Miru was waiting. He finds her in that situation. They say they were looking for Kirishima and that the guy tried to help anyway. Miru asks what happened, and the boy tries to punch Miru with everything he's got, but Kirishima appears and ends up defending her. Miru realizes it was Kirishima, and then the boy asks if Kirishima wants to fight at that moment. The protagonist asks if they want something from Kirishima, and they immediately say they were looking for him after all, sounding irritated. At that moment, Kirishima ends up giving those guys a bloodthirsty look and says that he is Kirishima no matter how much those guys hate him. If they lay a finger on Miru, they would never be forgiven. The two of them are overcome with fear, wondering why he seems like a completely different person, and they decide to flee the area. In the end, no one truly understands how Kirishima is feeling, but looking down at his side, he realizes he is trembling with intense fear, while Miru looks relieved. He looks at Miru and asks if she is okay, and at that moment, she decides to step closer and gives Kirishima a kiss. He feels completely lost, and soon Miru asks him again to stop using honorifics, telling him he was being very courageous. Regardless of having good combat skills, this was outside the dungeons. It was because those guys were bullying Miru, and that simply struck a nerve in him. Miru smiles, saying that Kirishima really was very cool and thanks him for the day, but says she has to go home due to the importance of maintaining her channel, asking if he is okay with that. Kirishima says it is all right and that he would see her later, so Miru leaves. Upon exiting the park, she starts running, thinking that she really went too far. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a man on the phone is screaming about why they can't find Kirishima, even though they found someone who actually called himself Kirishima. It was Guyama, demanding to know why they couldn't find the protagonist sooner. He slams his phone onto the ground, and a notification appears asking if that was the God of Destruction account. He picks the phone up again, seeing comments asking if he is the God of Destruction, how it feels to be the one everyone is turning their backs on, and saying that it's all over for him, that the God of Destruction was nothing but trash. Guyama says it was all Kirishima's fault and vows to get revenge while punching the wall, saying that even if he reveals Kirishima's identity, it wouldn't be enough. All those comments are giving him a headache. Eventually, he turns on the room lights, revealing that everything is from Miru. He had various dolls, videos, everything of hers. The god of destruction name was now nothing more or less than the identity people associated with him. Guyama always commented on Miru's videos, saying she was very beautiful, and every time his name was announced during a broadcast, he would send many donations, certain the girl would remember him sooner or later. He imagined himself in various scenarios with her, presenting Guyama in the middle of a stream, announcing that the god of destruction, who had supported the channel all this time, had become a regular member. He ends up saying he has an important announcement to make, that from today on, Miru was his girlfriend. Regardless, thinking about all of it was very embarrassing. Holding a Miru doll, he says he would stay close to her and that he was the truly kind guy. But Kirishima kept getting in the middle, and he would never forgive him for anything. Meanwhile, at school the next day, girls were paying attention to someone, asking who that handsome guy was. It was Kirishima. Everyone looked at him, saying he was cool and wondering why no one tries to talk to him. Being the center of attention wasn't for him. Kirishima felt very embarrassed by this. Meanwhile, Miru catches his attention, saying that he was very popular now. But it wasn't just that. She also wanted to show Kirishima many things at that moment. In the end, everyone began to notice good things about him. Miru asks if he remembers the conversation about being a regular member of the channel, and Kirishima says regarding that, he would help her and try his best. Miru says it is great news, and Kirishima gets embarrassed with her hugging him out of nowhere. People ask who those two were, and Miru apologizes, saying they were leaving and would talk more after school. Kirishima says it was fine, and they would see each other later. Upon entering the room, everyone looked at him, wondering who Kirishima was. He sits at his desk, and they experience a reality check, wondering if he was the one who appeared in the broadcast from 2 days ago. Everyone looked at him, perhaps because of the haircut, but somehow he was starting to feel like royalty. He defeated the Red Dragon and protected Miru in the middle of a broadcast. He never thought people's attitudes would change so much. Maybe he isn't a useless person after all. But at that moment someone enters, demanding Kirishima's attention. It was Guyama, looking furious. He asks where Kirishima is. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries not to be afraid. He catches Guyama's eye and asks what he wants at that moment. Guyama remembers someone mentioned the look had changed and asks who that boy is. Kirishima simply says he just got a haircut, and Guyama gets irritated, grabbing Kirishima by the collar and telling him not to get full of himself just because he started serving out of nowhere. Guyama was stronger. He should understand that, and Kirishima would pay for this tonight, at 8 p.m. He should go to the Dragon's Cave. Kirishima gets irritated and asks what was going on, and Guyama says he was serious, which startles Kirishima. Later, after school, Kirishima decides to talk to Miru about what happened during the school day. She says that it wasn't bearable, and asks why Kirishima was simply accepting it. Guyama was a very one-sided guy and was being much more aggressive now, but Miru had plans for that, and they decide to talk. They would even eat. She holds Kirishima's hand and apologizes, saying that while Guyama isn't the kindest person in the world, they could call him out. Kirishima says he wasn't the one being good and that he needs to be stronger, but Miru would go with him. The meeting was at 8 p.m., and there was still time left since it was around 6 in the evening. She asks if he has appeared in a dungeon yet. The reward for the Red Dragon was exactly the time to use that. Meanwhile, they head toward the dragon's dungeon, and at that moment, Miru activates her broadcast outfit and is 100% ready. She asks if anything is wrong. Kirishima was just embarrassed, saying she looked very cute. Miru got embarrassed too, saying that was cheating. Immediately after, they decide to equip some items that were in Kirishima's inventory. There were many materials, so it was time to make some very strong weapons, specifically using the items left behind by the dragon. He is also able to activate the fire attribute. Soon, there was a blueprint to make the Supreme Demon Sword. It was an unpracticed weapon that no one would recommend. That sword increases attack power by 5,000. However, if any magic is used even once, all of the user's magic power drops to 0, and survival is much more important when it comes to dungeon exploration. So, that weapon was considered very bad. Kirishima thinks for a bit. A new skill had been added that morning, a new rule breaker. These items they called impracticable weapons, which delete all magic power upon use, would simply make him a genius if combined with that specific ability. Miru says he was right, and that he should try to make the Supreme Demon Sword. Doing a broadcast about it would be something that would circulate worldwide, as she had never seen such a weapon before. There is still time until Guyama appears at that place. Understanding the situation, Kirishima decides to go through with it while Miru begins preparing the broadcast. She asks about the sword, and Kirishima explains it was already being made, and at that moment, he should just relax. As he prepares for the broadcast, Kirishima asks her to wait a bit. Guyama was appearing there ahead of schedule. He was super irritated along with his two henchmen, demanding Kirishima's attention and asking if he was flirting with a girl before the battle and if he was underestimating their boss. Suddenly, at that moment, Guyama ends up throwing a punch with everything he's got at one of his henchmen, causing him to crash into the ground with full force, while the other henchman stands there wondering what was happening. An aura begins to appear around Guyama. It was time for him to explain why he and Miru were together. The first thing Guyama asks is what the relationship between the two of them is, and if perhaps he was already too late. Kirishima tries to offer an explanation, but he cannot find the words. When he looks back toward Miru, the girl was simply looking embarrassed, which left Guyama completely lost, totally shattering his dreams and placing Kirishima, who was standing right there, in their stead. He ends up grabbing his sword and charging with everything he has toward Kirishima. Meanwhile, at someone's house, a girl enters her father's room, asking if he was watching Miru's broadcasts, and if it were true, it was about the emergency monster from the other day. Miru was saved by that boy, and because of that, the views surpassed 20,000 people instantly. The girl was feeling envious, and asks if it was the Kirishima from her school, wondering if he had always been that cool. Soon the girl's father realizes that the god of destruction was there, and that person was doing some broadcasts together. He was truly a very well-mannered boy and always someone very necessary. He was surprised to see him appearing in Miru's broadcasts, but he was acting out of the ordinary today. Guyama demands that the only one who deserves to be near Miru was himself, telling him to just look at that black dragon mirror and that perfect sword, while also calling Kirishima a piece of trash idiot. The father and the girl were completely startled by this. Soon, the father tries to say that the real power of the god of destruction was his armor, which was indeed very powerful. Immediately afterward, Guyama tells Kirishima that this was a duel. Following that, Miru asks him to demonstrate all of his power, and Kirishima simply draws his supreme demon sword. At that exact moment, Guyama is startled, as are the father and the girl. Guyama's henchman says that weapon was super rare, that much was certain. It was the impracticable weapon of the Red Dragon, the Supreme Demon Sword. Everyone had heard that holding that weapon increases attack power by 5,000, but in return, it consumes all magic power in a single, solitary attack. Soon the father wonders why he chose that weapon if it wasn't truly used for combat, but finds it interesting regardless. Guyama begins to laugh, saying that the weapon drains all of his magic with just one single attack, making it perfect for Kirishima. Next, he looks at Miru and asks why she was always with that stupid guy compared to an idiot like him. Miru interrupts Guyama at that moment, saying that was enough and that he should stop speaking ill of Kirishima and move forward. She had already decided to make him a regular member of the channel. At that moment, he is startled, as are the father and the girl, and everyone in the chat was also starting to get even more shocked. Soon, Kirishima asks if the broadcast was turned off, as it wasn't supposed to be an official announcement on the stream. He thinks he switched it and left it off, but obviously, she was plotting everything. Subsequently, Guyama ends up getting angry, saying she would regret this, and that he would be sure to prove he was much better. He then charges toward Kirishima, saying that the weapon was completely impracticable despite its power, and Miru wishes Kirishima good luck. A physical attack appeared out of nowhere. It was his skill activating to ignore the magic power of the attack. He should have known that physical powers do not work on him. He then asks what Guyama was trying to do, as he was a high-level explorer, a veteran. He takes his swords, and they begin to clash, until he notices that Guyama's sword was very light, and simply throws it far away against the wall. At that moment, Guyama becomes even more irritated, saying there is no way he can lose. So he grabs an enchantment potion, stands up, and drinks it, saying that it wouldn't let his stamina drop and that he wanted to defeat Kirishima once and for all. The viewers comment that this was cheating and that he was using cheat items. As expected of a high-ranking explorer, he couldn't let his guard down. He would have no choice but to test a new ability, the Extreme Demon Sword, with a magic effect exceeding 5,000. Then the guy throws a fireball, and Guyama calls him an idiot, but the fireball begins to grow in size, and Guyama realizes it just before it causes a gigantic explosion. Guyama emerged from that explosion as if nothing had happened, saying that was enough for him to think he would defeat Guyama. Kirishima begins to grow winded, saying it was as expected his magic power dropped to 0 all at once, which was difficult, but he couldn't simply give up now. Seeing this, he has no choice but to use his new ability, so he activates his own skill that no longer restricts his magic power, and thus he begins to hurl several fireballs, which was something he is able to do with a sword. Miru says it was expected, and Guyama eventually asks to wait a moment, until several explosions start happening, and everyone begins to get scared by it, but the viewers were impressed. Now that he had mastered the fireball, he wanted to try using another fire magic power as well. When he raises the sword to use one more power, Miru touches Kirishima's shoulder, saying she thinks that's enough. He thinks he was going to do everything now, but he just has to look at Guyama. He was already destroyed and could no longer fight in any way. The winner, therefore, was Kirishima. Everyone was very excited about this, saying he was very cool and that everything was very interesting. Donations are flooding in, one of 5,000 saying he was very cool, one of 50,000 saying he should look at everyone, and another donation of 50,000 saying he should go all out. 20,000 people were watching. Until at that moment, someone managed to stand up. It was Guyama, saying that Kirishima wasn't going all out and that he spent 2 years making his armor, and that he wouldn't forgive Kirishima for what he did. Miru asks if he still wanted to fight, and that he didn't go all out. Right at that moment, Guyama asks how this could have happened. They look at the time. It was 8:30, and he would let Kirishima go all out because it was time to go home. Kirishima says it was still 8:30 at night, but Guyama leaves crying. And at that moment, someone was watching that broadcast, a woman who said that Kirishima was pretending to be a good boy, but he is simply just like his father. Later that day, when Kirishima was sleeping at his house, his phone begins to ring, and he wonders who it was at that hour. When he answers the phone, Miru was speaking, saying that things were bad, that yesterday's broadcast was live again, the duel against Guyama was live, and he was getting a lot of attention. In fact, it was even in the main news on the internet. Kirishima decided to look at his phone. He realizes that many news stories were spreading, with people wondering who the real god of destruction was, the mysterious boy who appeared again and defeated Guyama as if it were nothing. Guyama, the guy who did collaborative broadcasts with others, was exposed for severe bullying, and it seems he was being expelled from school at that moment. Miru was definitely a very popular person on the internet, and things were getting out of hand. Matters were starting to become very one-sided for Kirishima. At that moment, he tries to speak with Miru, who thanks him, as inviting him to the broadcast seems to have been the right choice. Kirishima says he didn't do anything. He was being very kind and says they would see each other at school. In the end, Kirishima sighs after the call is disconnected and says that now he was being useful to other people, so he says he is leaving. However, at that moment, at his house, there were many people outside asking if they could at least shake hands or take some photos. Kirishima says he is going to be late, so he decides to run to school. But at school, things were even worse. Many reporters were there in front, asking if he really was suffering from bullying, asking what kind of ability rule ignorance was, and asking what his relationship with Miru is. At that moment, Kirishima was very frightened, until someone arrived, took his hand, and simply told him to follow her, and so they ran away. Miru sees this and asks who that girl was, wondering if everything was all right now. Kirishima asks who she is, and after introducing herself, she says she is very kind and they are together, but she asks for a favor and wonders if she could go out with him, stating she would do anything, and that there was nothing else in that world. However, at that moment, Kirishima ends up getting more and more embarrassed, until Miru appears asking what they were doing. Kirishima apologizes, and Miru immediately grabs the girl, stating that Kirishima was in trouble. The girl asks who she is, and Miru replies that she is the only person who should be there at that moment. She was serious about it and said that no one should get in the way. Miru introduces herself as Kirishima's best friend and asks Kirishima if it was true, but he was terrified 2 girls were fighting over him. At that point, Miru ends up taking Kirishima by the arm and leading him away, and she starts wondering frantically who that girl was. Kirishima wonders if she was angry, and Miru asks if she interrupted a great moment, saying that if he wanted to go back, it was fine. Kirishima says he wouldn't do that. He wanted to help his mother as soon as possible, which is why he couldn't think much about romance right now. Miru apologizes, realizing she acted on her own for him without thinking things through, and then asks what happened to his father. Kirishima explains that, in a battle against an emergency rank monster, he ended up losing his life. Miru is startled and apologizes, saying she didn't know. Kirishima says she doesn't need to apologize and that it was a long time ago. Honestly, he can barely remember much about his father, but he clearly remembers the words about protecting anyone he manages to care about. He isn't a saint, but he wants to do his job simply as he promised his own father. Miru remembers when she was protected by Kirishima and feels happy, saying that he was doing his best, and that was already enough. After he gives thanks, Guyama was at home receiving various hate messages, and it was all Kirishima's fault. Someone crazy like him should be reported to the police. Then, someone calls Guyama. He wonders who it could be, until the voice on the line says that the principal is calling Guyama and that he should show up at 8 o'clock sharp, otherwise he will be expelled. Guyama asks them to wait a bit, but then a woman asks him to calm down. Guyama's mother said it was all right and that she wanted to clear things up that way. A time like this could be left to his mother and the family. She is going to make people have the same experience as before. Then, they go to the school principal's office. Today, at that moment, they catch Guyama's attention, saying that because of his actions, the school's reputation had fallen to the ground, and as such, he will have a 1-year suspension that was decided to begin today. He should reflect a bit on his actions and think about everything he did. Normally, that would result in expulsion, but they have an issue regarding how the bullying was overlooked at that time. Considering it was only a punishment, the mother asks if the story simply ends there, and the principal asks what she was trying to say. Guyama's mother says she would accept Guyama starting over, but she also has a request. The principal asks what it is, and she immediately brings up Kirishima, saying he was caught in the middle of the commotion, and asks if he could be suspended as well. The principal asks what she was talking about and why this kind of thing was happening. At that moment, she pulls a letter from her pocket, asking if he intends to play the fool and if he knows who she is. The principal looks at it, and the mother says the story was simple. Manipulate the masses and the media during her son's suspension, and even then make it so. Kirishima was exposed. The one who truly carries all the guilt would be Kirishima. The principal asks what that was, and then he sighs deeply and tells the boy's mother that she simply has a way with words, asking where Kirishima would be at that moment and stating that he knew the article published that week was indeed not a lie. The woman asks what was happening, and the principal says it would be clear. From now on, the accident in Fortuno that was recognized as the death of Kirishima's father was said to be caused by an attack by an emergency monster. Her abilities truly are impressive, which was to summon monsters. The three of them go quiet, until at that moment someone enters the principal's office. It was Kirishima, who heard everything just then. Guyama stands up from the sofa asking his mother if it really had been her who killed Kirishima's father, and she says it has nothing to do with him. And at that moment, Kirishima ended up apologizing, but the door was open. Then the woman says she would be leaving now and passes by Kirishima, giving him a look of pure hatred, and then they leave. At that point, the principal caught Kirishima's attention, apologizing for calling him so suddenly and saying that he should have a conversation with him. Kirishima sits on the sofa, and then the principal bows, apologizing for everything that happened, saying it is because of him that there was a blind eye toward the bullying and that nothing had been noticed. So he apologizes. Kirishima asks him not to blame himself and says that, in fact, he could raise his head. Everything was fine from now on, as he has the strength to protect himself. He was very cool, simply like my own father. Immediately after, Kirishima asks if the principal knew his father and that woman from before. Then Kirishima asks if she and his father had something in common. The principal responds that she was Goyama's mother and his father, and that woman graduated from the school. Both were students. According to the weekly news, those two were very close, especially after his father's death. Much of the information was provided by the woman, and now everything is nothing but a mystery. Then Kirishima asks if the principal remembers what was reported in the news. The principal then begins to talk to Kirishima, saying those two people were very close friends. Kirishima's father was very famous during school, and he was already an explorer who was above everyone else. Everyone called him the star of that school. At that time, Guyama's mother and Kirishima's father were very close friends. After that, Guyama's mother went to meet someone, and Kirishima's father asks what happened out of the blue. She apologizes, saying she then judged the person by their value, and after that, The distance began to grow between them. Several years later, that woman became a central member of the dungeon operations. In a dungeon, the two started to meet again. Kirishima's father says it has been a long time since they saw each other, and at that time, his father was recognized by everyone as a high-ranking and very powerful explorer, a man full of charm. Then Kirishima asks how she became a member of the dungeon operations department and says, "That was very incredible." A dragon appeared at that moment, and Kirishima's father decided to protect everyone then. Seeing him in action was something that was very good for everyone. Both were already married and had their own families, but Guyama's mother received several messages saying that she then made a move on Kirishima's father. Obviously, he paid no attention and continued taking care of his own family, as he already had a precious wife and a very cute boy. She became irritated, broke her phone, and then realized that her humiliation turned into anger, and with that, the plan began to be formed. The two of them were in the middle of an exploration when she used her monster summoning ability and unleashed it upon all the group members as if it were an annihilation. Kirishima's father did everything he could to fight everyone off at that moment, so he told the two people in his group to run and said he would catch up with them later. His wife and her friend ended up running away. In the end, Kirishima's father was killed by a monster, and his wife decided to become an explorer in the midst of it all. That was all they knew at that point. Kirishima ends up getting irritated. In other words, he decides to tell Miru everything that happened then, and she couldn't understand how it all occurred, thinking perhaps it wasn't all true. Furthermore, his mother had never talked about these things that supposedly happened. Right at that moment, Miru receives a notification on her phone and decides to show it to Kirishima, warning everyone to be careful of a certain person, Guyama's mother. Miru says the person who sent the message was one of her greatest possible fans and had always provided support in the past. She wouldn't say something so ridiculous like that, but soon no one knows why she would suddenly speak about this person, and then an emerging monster appeared, making them wonder why that was. Kirishima comes up with a plan and decides to head into the forest to check what was happening. At that moment, a girl was being kidnapped by a monster and was crying out for help. The girl's father was watching Miru's broadcast, and at that moment saw his daughter in that situation. He was terrified by what was happening as she was trapped by the monster. Miru got angry and asked why there was a monster like that, as there had been no reports of a monster with similar plant-like features in the middle of this dungeon. Kirishima prepared himself with his supreme sword and tried to defend against the monster's attack, but the monster was much faster and trapped Kirishima once and for all. His sword wouldn't cut. The power of the demon's sword lie regarding the magic attack meant someone with such low stats has no strength. At that moment, Miru ends up counterattacking the monster and destroying all of its defenses. Kirishima gives thanks. At the distance they are now, everything should be fine. He never imagined that this monster was going to attack at this size. However, the girl was now in danger. Using fire magic there could be very dangerous, as it could accidentally hit the girl, and that would be no joke. Perhaps Miru's magic sword could work, but at that distance, it was very difficult, and it wouldn't be right for them to use it in that case. He has no choice but to use the new ability. Kirishima would use the new ability, so he asks for help. Miru asks if it was a new ability that Kirishima obtained during the fight against Guyama. Right at that moment, the girl's father was running while watching Miru's broadcast, praying for her to do her best because he is arriving, and saying he is counting on Kirishima to do everything. He tells the taxi driver to go all out, catching my drift, and the taxi driver starts speeding over the walls. Meanwhile, Miru was behind Kirishima, and he says everything was fine and he has no choice. He doesn't know how to do it. So he ends up activating the ability to ignore the magic limit and also ignore his own magic power, and thus the special fire dash technique happens. The monster tries to attack, and so Kirishima activates his power, ignoring space-time for 3 seconds. Everything around him begins to stop. Miru then realized that his new ability was to stop space-time, and thus they cut the monster enough to free the new girl. Next, they move far away from the monster, and at this, the girl's father is thrilled that everything worked out. She wakes up, and Kirishima gets her attention. She then jumps into the protagonist's arms, saying she was very scared. Miru, angry, tells her to stop that, and soon the girl realizes it was Miru and asks if she was doing a broadcast right now. Miru tells her to look at the situation and asks why she was caught by that monster. Actually, she doesn't know. She was on her way home until she suddenly lost consciousness. And when she woke up, she had already been caught by the monster, so Kirishima saved her. Miru gets irritated, saying it's better if she moves away from the protagonist. And shortly after that, the protagonist realizes that about 3 seconds have passed, and the monster tried to counterattack with everything. The broadcast chat was starting to get very confused, and soon the woman who did this, Guyama's mother, was there ready to observe Kirishima's new ability, saying it was interesting. For now, when they noticed it, they caught a strange smell. It was a very good scent, and he asked if Miru was smelling it too. Miru had a troubled look, until the two girls already start to approach Kirishima and throw themselves on top of him, saying it was starting to get very hot around there. They begin to take off their clothes little by little, and the broadcast goes crazy because of it. Guyama's mother says that things were starting to get interesting. He should lose his control and ruin his own reputation. The girl's father asks for Kirishima to stay calm and that he shouldn't ignore the phenomena. He couldn't let his daughter do that. Kirishima ends up losing a bit of control, but he starts pulling the girls out of the location. When they manage to exit the dungeon, Kirishima leaves the two girls on the ground, and he almost collapses. The next ability he wanted was to ignore gravity. People say that Kirishima was very cool, and the girl's father says he always trusted him. Miru wakes up asking what happened, if she fell asleep during the broadcast, and they soon inform her that, due to the Leaf King phenomena, she ended up fainting. They then ask if she did anything bizarre. Everything was fine, as Kirishima ended up saving her. The girl's father arrives calling for his daughter and the two hug. The taxi driver gets excited by this. Kirishima ends up smiling at that, and the girl's father thanks the protagonist for everything he did. And so Miru gets his attention, saying that every broadcast he appears in, everyone gets very excited about it. Kirishima asks what she is talking about at that point. Now he knows why he wasn't being affected by the phenomena. Kirishima ends up getting confused. He was somewhat nonsensical, introverted. At least he could get through it with rationality, never having been attacked by a girl in that way. Miru smiles and says he is very serious. While broadcasting, Guyama's mother was watching, saying that in order to bring Kirishima down, first they should kill Miru. Immediately afterward, they decided to go home. Kirishima ends up being a bit confused as to why Miru invited him to her house. Miru asks Kirishima not to be so nervous. Her mother was working, so she wasn't there. Kirishima asks if her father was there, but Miru explains that her father died 5 years ago in an accident. Kirishima was startled, and Miru said it was all right. They had already gone through the difficult times, and now he should understand. So Miru decides to invite Kirishima to her room. Right at that moment, there was someone there, and Miru decides to show that it was a girl who was always supporting her and always had important things to discuss with Kirishima. This girl had always been a woman. Dystria ends up hugging the protagonist, asking why he was talking like that. Immediately after, Dystria asks if the protagonist by any chance had forgotten her, and when he looks closely, he realizes she was his father's ally. Kirishima begins to cry, asking if she was there the whole time but never got in touch with him. Miru asks if they already know each other, and immediately after, Kirishima explains that Dystria was his father's disciple and that they had met for a short time, but after his father died, she disappeared on her own, and his mother never told him anything. She then apologizes, saying he was just a child and that she had her own reasons, but more importantly, they couldn't continue for now, as they had to stop that woman in time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it. So we go back to 13 years ago. Dystria ends up appearing because she was exploring some dungeons, and she was the leader in that place. But a man ends up asking her to stop that. It was Kirishima's father, saying that his wife was having some problems, and in dungeons, there is always the possibility of an emergent monster appearing. Dystria asks how that could happen, and says they should simply follow them. But, sadly, the monster ended up appearing, a huge dragon that ended up destroying everyone. It was almost like a hydra that advanced with its 3 heads for the attack. But Kirishima's father was there, fighting the monster, and asks if the people were okay. He had lost his eye, and that was no longer a problem for him. Then Kirishima finally understood. Dystria, at that moment, apologized and asked Kirishima's father if she could be his disciple, saying that it would be a great help to assist all her disciplines under her master's guidance. A rigorous training ended up happening. The training was very heavy, but it was also very good. On that day, when that woman already appeared, she tried to demonstrate the dangerous monsters inside a certain dungeon and said that the minister was still having problems at that time. The master heard her request, but due to the infinity of monsters that appeared in their direction, to protect everyone, the master sacrificed himself, and in the end, That was what happened during that exploration. While they go to the executive minister's house, he says he would only answer them one more time. Kirishima's father's death was an incomplete accident, and those are the final results of the investigation. If she wishes to maintain cooperation and the relationship with the minister moving forward, she should not get involved with Kirishima's family ever again. Distria obviously did not believe that and thought everything was a lie. But she ran out of the minister's house, and when she looked into the distance, something was on fire. It was Kirishima's house where he was with his mother, and the boy was still sleeping. Then Distria approached, asking if she was okay, and said she would never forgive them for anything. But Kirishima's mother held Distria's cheek and said it was all right, that from now on, she only wants to make her son grow up well, and that she would never need to worry anymore in her life. After that, Distria's relatives locked her in a room, and she felt as if life had lost all meaning. Her relatives bought various things to change her mind about giving up her own life, and by chance, she ended up watching Miru's broadcasts and felt healed again. A while later, when Kirishima appeared for the first time on Miru's broadcast, she was surprised but also incredibly happy about it. In fact, that woman's accounts were still moving in the shadows and sent a message to Kirishima. He was crying for his father and remembered when he used to play with him, so everyone gets sad. And Kirishima at that moment said he would not let her hurt anyone else, so it was no longer time to cry. Distria ends up hugging Kirishima and says it was all right, that he is a very good guy, but Miru separates the two of them. Then Distria explains that the woman did not appear after Kirishima, and the others ended up leaving alive, since they had their own methods, but she can no longer let it go. It was time to take her down as soon as possible. Immediately after, Miru says that it was part of his strategy. At that moment, Kirishima asks if she is going to get in the middle of this too. It was obvious, they are companions, and with that, they all get excited in the end. Distria apologizes to the protagonist's father, as she ended up pulling him into this, but she believes in the two of them who could defeat that evil woman. After nightfall, Distria and Kirishima decide to leave at that moment, and the protagonist talks about her showing up to see his mother. The woman says no, it was fine. Seeing her around there really wasn't very common, and she is still someone who has had support for her since school. Elementary school was her in the end. The woman didn't want to talk much about it. And Kirishima remembers when he opened a letter from the foundation that looked exactly like his name. It was too much of a coincidence, and she was still very bad at lying in the end. But there is no need to worry because this time he is going to win, and she gets excited and ends up hugging the protagonist. The next day, they go to a broadcast Miru and Kirishima. There she says hello to everyone who was watching and thanks everyone for the support. But she ends up having her broadcast machine taken, and thus the bird flew away, and the woman ends up saying that it was very good for them. Kirishima ends up being captured at that moment and starts thinking about his new ability to stop for 3 seconds, which was impressive, and he had to prepare everything at that moment. Those vines were completely soaked in alcohol, and she didn't intend to use fire magic. Everyone now she is going to play and lower the hypocrisy mask, so they should introduce her real name. The woman ends up talking about Miru's real name. Her father was someone who caused a car accident 5 years ago and killed some pedestrians. Besides that, he ended up dying too. The family members were suffering greatly, and some of them lost their mothers and are also living in destroyed lives. And besides that, she had a comfortable life, changed her own name, used a beautiful face, and also became someone who was constantly streaming live all the time. She was certainly looking at her own life, and she did not regret any of it. Miru falls to the ground, and at that moment Kirishima tries to get her attention, but the woman says that Kirishima also needs to take some of this blame as well, because all of these things ended up appearing because of him too, and considering the feelings of the victims' families, she thought it left a terrible taste behind. That was exactly why he needed to stop doing collaboration streams with that woman immediately. Otherwise, the scandals would end up burning him too. Once, Miru told him that he needed to have more confidence in himself. So this time he was going to say those same words back to her. Kirishima said that Miru was incredible, and that meant she should not force herself so far beyond her limits. She had been doing everything she possibly could, and still managed to help the victims' families in the end. He understood the reason why she had been desperately trying to increase the views and risking her life to fight monsters while keeping a simple smile on her face. Standing in front of the camera while still covering up all of her injuries, there was nobody who had been working as hard as she had at that moment. That was exactly why she should continue doing this. Kirishima believed in her, so she should have far more confidence in herself. Miru ends up crying, and Kirishima refuses the woman's proposal. Whether he gets cancelled or not, he was still going to walk down the path that he believed was right and choose a life by Miru's side. Then the monster was defeated with a single pull, and Kirishima activates his ability, but someone suddenly appears behind him at that moment and kicks Kirishima directly in the face, sending him flying far away. Soon after, Miru asks if he was alright, and the group of that woman had appeared. The people from the dungeon ministry were all watching them on television. The broadcast ends up being interrupted and shut down, and the woman says that she was going to demonstrate what happens to those who throw themselves against her. At that moment, Miru begins to think about what was happening, and that none of this was ever supposed to happen again. Kirishima notices something, and asks if that was armor, and says that they had never seen it before. The man says that the armor was completely resistant against all types of fire magic, and since all of their attacks were fire magic, that armor had been specially prepared for Kirishima himself. There was no possible way for them to fight against it under those conditions. Then the man asks what happened. The armor had left him speechless. But Kirishima says that everything was fine and that all this time he had simply been preparing something perfect. Then he uses wind magic and launches it directly against them. The men begin to panic, wondering how something like that was even possible. Then they are thrown into the middle of the tornado, and the woman jumps backward with the blessing of the red dragon. And his sword made Kirishima's magical power increase by 5,000 points, allowing him to activate several different spells. And he also activates earth magic, throwing gigantic rocks directly into everyone's faces. The men begin asking themselves how he was able to use wind magic and earth magic alongside an additional fire attribute. It was far too overwhelming and terrifying for them. At that moment, the guy was throwing absolutely everything at them, and because of that, the man managed to run behind a rock. Miru asks if Kirishima can use that type of magic too, and the woman says that it was impossible, and asks what the meaning of that was. There was no way something like that could happen. He was only supposed to use fire magic. The ability that Kirishima gained through every battle and throughout all that time had been obtained because of wind energy and because of earth magic. Something was wrong. The minister was not supposed to establish rules like that. But the woman says that everything was fine, because in that case she would punish them personally, so they should prepare themselves, and Kirishima would join his father by her own hands. And so the woman summons 3 beasts, and Kirishima activates his battles in order to break the rules, while Miru rushes forward and grabs a camera, throwing it backward with all her strength in order to start another broadcast. The woman says that it was extremely annoying, and Miru demands an answer about what had actually happened in the end. The woman says that she would tell her if possible, but she should still remember the agonized expression on Kirishima's father's face when he died. He believed in her until the very end, and never once suspected that he would be betrayed by a companion, which made him a complete fool. Miru asks if she isn't afraid that the whole world will discover who she truly is, and she says no one would ever find out because she would silence everyone at that moment. She claims she was right and throws herself back while holding Kirishima's hand. At that moment, she begins to summon a dragon, saying she doesn't know what their scheme is, but that they had already finished things a long time ago. So, let's summon the dragon. Kirishima activated the 3-second power. 1 second had passed. He used the fire restriction power and activated much more power for himself. 2 seconds passed. He threw everything at the dragon. And in the 3rd second, he had already counterattacked the woman. And at that moment, Miru was right behind her with a sword to her neck, and at that point, she bows. Miru demands that she tell exactly everything that happened with Kirishima's father. He was going to suspect something, and even better, he actually tried to use information to expose all of them. So at the very least, they could be erased from that world. She had no choice but to go as far as possible because of that. Then she shows that she has a jewel in her chest. It was the minister's special test being implemented. It was so dangerous that the possibility of it causing a disease in the world was skyrocketing. Because of this, she throws it into the air, and a monster emerges from it. Kirishima asks what that was. It was a power beyond the strongest of all. Miru is thrown back with full force, and Kirishima ends up using his 5,000 power, but it didn't work at all. When the monster goes to counterattack everyone, Guyama appears to defend her. And so, we go back to the past, where Guyama was telling his mother that he managed to come in first in the 50m dash during PE, and the teacher said he would be a great explorer in the future. She says it was all right and that he should listen carefully. In that world, things would be perfect, and nothing would be good for the failures. For example, that boy, and she points to Kirishima when he was a child. We skip a bit further into the future, where Kirishima was sitting at his desk wondering what was happening. Guyama watched this, and soon asks his mother if she doesn't think that would be too difficult. He did nothing, and he should make sure to clear that up. But she says it was only natural for a child to be bullied that way. In fact, it was good for society. She then holds Guyama and says he was perfect, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. At that moment, Guyama, who heard Kirishima say he would live by Miru's side regardless of what happened, felt uplifted and decided to hold on. He thought of his mother and asked why she had done that. He should be afraid of the past and indeed managed to fight alongside Miru, and even now, in the midst of all this, he manages to make a life-or-death choice. And Guyama might not know if he is fine the way he is at that moment, but he receives some notifications about his mother on his phone and decides to prepare. He stands up, stating he won't let things continue this way and that he will follow his own path as well. Immediately, the woman begins to activate the barrier to counter all of their magic attacks. So nothing is going to work. Kirishima ends up stopping time for 3 seconds, but that doesn't work either. The monster manages to counterattack. At that moment, Miru prepares for an attack, but it was too late. When she hits the monster, it wasn't enough, and she is thrown far away. Kirishima tries to run to help her, but it isn't enough, and that is when he appears. Guyama's mother becomes completely enraged, and he tries to use his power to help as well, throwing a monster back with all his might. He prepares to strike the monster's crystal with everything he has, but that same crystal shoots a laser so strong at Guyama that he is thrown back with full force. Kirishima and Miru immediately try to help him up, and his mother asks what he was doing if he was attacking the wrong thing, and says all he should do was listen to her. Guyama tells her to shut up, saying he was tired of taking orders from her, and that he would never be anything of hers again at that moment. If she lays a hand on those two, he will fight again and counterattack multiple times. His mother starts making a difficult face, and the boy gets angry. Guyama doesn't know exactly what time they are talking about, but at that moment he would help Kirishima. He says it was all right, even though his magic wasn't working properly. Apparently the monster's barrier was blocking all attacks. But it wasn't just any barrier, it didn't seem to withstand physical attacks. So it can block magic attacks, but it might be vulnerable to physical attacks. The monster was truly very difficult, and if they get close enough, they might be taken out by one of its attacks, but wait a moment. Guyama starts thinking that he was sure that gem was starting to glow. Perhaps that was the monster's weak point. So they should destroy it. In that case, Kirishima has a plan. Then the woman begins to prepare, saying she would have no mercy even for her own son. She puts on her headset to talk to her team and says it doesn't matter. There are no exceptions, and soon asks if her son is in the middle of it too, saying he would be the last one to be eliminated at that moment. The man says he understands the situation, and then Kirishima and the others ask Kirishima if he is serious. If that plan fails, they will die instantly. They have no other choice. They would have to do it regardless of what happens. The monster ends up creating a barrier around itself, and Kirishima's mother keeps thinking about what had happened, saying that now there were no points left for them to fight. Kirishima activates his battles and his magic, but the monster dodges them all. At that moment, the woman realizes the other two were going to attack from out of the monster's line of sight, but the monster activates its crystal. Part of the barrier had been deactivated, and it was exactly as Miru thought. They were going to open the barrier, and that was their chance. Kirishima activates his 3-second time stop, but the monster counterattacks with another power. Kirishima starts thinking about what was happening at that moment, and Miru says that was the moment the monster deactivates the barrier, and when the magic battle comes, no one could hold out against that moment. The monster starts getting increasingly powerful. Then Guyama appears to attack his power with everything and deliver a strike to the monster's head. He hit so hard that the crystal began to crack. That caused a headache, and the monster began to scream toward the sky as it started to kneel. At that moment, Guyama says the gem was much harder than he thought, but he managed to deal some damage, so that was what mattered. One more attack and everything would be finished at that moment, but they just had to look into the distance and see what was happening. Several monsters were being summoned alongside that giant, and now Guyama's mother was starting to get more serious, and things were starting to look horrible. But right at that moment, she says she will keep them occupied for a long time. The monsters began to be defeated, but there were still many more, and Miru was starting to get tired. Guyama tells her not to go any further than that, and Miru asks if Kirishima is okay. He says yes, but the barrier was simply going to be erased. At that moment, however, the barrier began to expand, which shouldn't have been a problem. His mother had already said previously that the barrier would eventually cover the entire dungeon, so they shouldn't worry they needed to run right then, otherwise Kirishima's magic would no longer work. And he was in a terrible position. They couldn't get any closer to those monsters at that hour, and if they broke the barrier, there was a reason. Right at that moment, Guyama calls out to Miru, saying he is at his own limit. He is going to use the rest of his magic power to launch one last massive attack and use the holy sword to crush all the gems. She understands, but at that moment, someone appears behind her, ready to attack them all, telling everyone to leave their weapons behind. It was an invisible man. He began to cut Miru's neck and says that everyone should now run back. And then at that moment, the minister begins to talk about Kirishima's father, saying that in the end, they knew this kind of thing would happen. Kirishima asks what that man knows, saying it was enough and he should stop. The man says he would continue following that woman's command, but he ends up taking a punch and flying as far away as possible at that moment. Someone ends up appearing, and everyone is startled. It was Dystria, apologizing for keeping everyone waiting. At that moment, the protagonist gets excited about it, and the spirit standing behind her was very large. Dystria ends up catching the woman's attention, and she says she remembers those skills very well. She was the disciple of Kirishima's father, and, in the end, he ended up surviving only to turn back and lose his life. In other words, for Dystria, she really did kill the protagonist's father. She says that was exactly right, and that she wouldn't let anyone else survive at this point. And so, at that hour, Dystria raises her finger, and several broadcast cameras appear. The woman wonders what that was, and soon Miru speaks up, asking if she thinks breaking the camera would actually stop her. She was broadcasting that entire moment. The whole world was watching her movies. Everyone in the chat was speaking very ill of that woman, and Guyama began to cry because everyone was cheering him on in some way. It was simply something to see. Everyone decided to witness his courage, and they soon say they would never let them make another mistake like that. Kirishima says it wasn't the beginning, but rather their final fight. At that time, she says she would detonate everyone, including her own son. Then Dystria ends up charging against the spirit the woman had summoned at that moment, and the two end up colliding swords. The force was so great that the wind threw everyone away, and no one had any idea she was that strong at that moment. Kirishima says it was his first time seeing it, but he was still excited for it. Right at that moment, the demon begins to open its mouth, and at that hour, the attack is defended, but the spirit falls heavily to the ground. Now was the time to destroy the crystal. Kirishima ends up using his power to ignore attacks if magic doesn't work. He just has to use his attacks that are not magic-based. And so, at that moment, when the demon goes to attack, the spirit stands up and delivers a blow to the monster's neck. And so Guyama prepares for the attack, together with Miru, who was starting to attack the monster's gem. At that moment, the gem ends up breaking, and they all call out to each other. Kirishima creates a massive fireball, an advanced magic, and ends up destroying the monster once and for all. Everyone starts getting excited. The barrier ends up breaking, and so Kirishima calls upon his firepower to destroy the rest of the monsters that were left. They are all defeated, and while cheering everyone up, they notice the woman starts to run. Guyama calls for his mother, but it was too late. She tells him not to mess with her because life couldn't end that way. But at that moment, the minister ends up appearing, saying she shouldn't give up yet. The woman is lost, and later, at the exit of the dungeon, she is arrested. Guyama tries to call his mother, but she simply looked away. Meanwhile, Kirishima's friend ends up appearing, saying that everything went according to plan, but he really wanted to fight with the group and help everyone. They could leave that for the next time. And at that moment, a woman ends up appearing. Kirishima looks back, and the woman asks if they have a minute, as the Prime Minister wanted to meet them. Startled, they wonder what would happen at that moment. The Prime Minister ended up appearing at that ceremony and gave Kirishima a letter of honor for his extraordinary dedication and indomitable spirit in leading the exploration of a top-level dungeon. He protected countless citizens from a terrible assault. This caused people to enter the dungeon, so it was easy to imagine that the damage would have been taken outside the planet, and the scale would be simply enough for no one to ignore. Because of this, he gives Kirishima the courage to inspire the hearts of those who were watching the broadcasts. He was given the Society Award for High Courage, and the Prime Minister himself would give him the national honor to recognize his achievements. Kirishima receives that paper very well, and everyone was crying at that moment, including his mother. Thus, in that broadcast, Everyone begins to comment on it. Meanwhile, in a nearby restaurant, Miru was talking to a woman. She asks Miru to lift her head and says all the work she did for years was enough. At that moment, they should compensate for the order. However, she was now sending money for the rest of her life. At first, she hated Miru and thought she would never do that, but she forgot, and it was enough. Even though she lost the child Kirishima's father, the child her father killed in that accident. It was enough, and it was already good for all the families to think about. At that moment, it was time for her to start her own life. 4 years ago, Miru worked very hard, sewed her own clothes, decided to do broadcasts, defeated countless monsters to try to get enough money, wrote letters infinite times, made various broadcasts, and tried to help all the families that were affected by the accident her father committed. And at that moment, the woman says she did her best, and Miru begins to cry. After the meeting, she thinks about following her own life, and, at that moment, thinks of Kirishima and asks why she was thinking about him. But someone catches her attention, and at that moment everything was right.